Okay, so we're going to go over the lymphatic system. You'll notice that chapter 22 is over the lymphatic system and the immune system. Usually those two are put together. Since we don't have that much time, though, I was going to skip over the immune system part of the chapter, since you all go over quite a bit of that in microbiology. And so I'm just going to focus on the lymphatic system. We also have respiratory, which I should be able to get through on Thursday, and then the digestive system, which I'll be able to cover probably partially on Thursday and then the rest of it on Tuesday. And so your next exam is Thursday of next week. Still working on the study hints and PowerPoint for 25. Most of 25, though, I cover on the board lecturing, so I'm probably not going to do a whole lot of changing of the PowerPoints for 25. Okay, so the lymphatic system. What does the lymphatic system have to do with? If you think of all the body systems, you can hopefully name all of them. And you probably have a little idea what all of them do, the least of which probably is the lymphatic system. So can you at least give me some of the structures that make up the lymphatic system? What is found in the lymphatic system? Lymph nodes. Very good. So that should be one of the first things you think of when you think about the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system includes lymph nodes, but what would you say the overall function of the lymphatic system is? It's involved in the immune response. So we know that lymph nodes, what do you know about lymph nodes? I mean, just if you were to ask your parents or grown-ups what is the purpose of lymph nodes, what do you think they would say? What do they tell you, if anything? So sometimes they get swollen, which usually means what? Infection. That's all I was getting at. So those are things that lay people know about the lymphatic system. It's a very small part of the lymphatic system function. So that's one of them, though, fights infection, and that's why the lymphatic system in most textbooks is combined with the immune system, because they work together. The immune system is not really a system, because systems are made up of what? Right, organs. And really the immune system is more cells, not organs. So it's combined here with the lymphatic system, which we'll see includes vessels, similar to the circulatory system. So the lymphatic system is a system of tissues and vessels. And the tissues we'll talk about are usually referred to as lymphoid tissue, and that just means they contain lymphocytes, one of the types of white blood cells. They're scattered throughout the body, so the lymphatic system is scattered throughout the body, the vessels, and they service almost all regions. So we'll see what that means in a moment. So as far as the functions, you're going to need to know these as the functions of the lymphatic system. But just like anything else, just memorizing those functions is not enough. Understand those functions. So when I say the function of the lymphatic system, the primary function is fluid balance. Right now you probably have no idea what that means, but after I finish you will. So you have to understand how the lymphatic system controls the fluids in the body. The fluid in the lymphatic system is called lymph, or lymph fluid. So as I told you, the vessels, the lymphatic vessels, are similar in a lot of ways to blood vessels. Blood vessels transport blood. Lymphatic vessels transport lymph. The second function you already told me about, what the lymph nodes do, protect from infection, And then the last function is absorption of fats. And I don't think I really have a slide that explains this all that well, so I'll go ahead and explain what the absorption of fats involves. So next week we'll talk about the digestive system. One of the primary functions of the digestive system is to break down the foods that we eat to their simplest form, monomers. You all have heard of monomers. So like the monomers of carbohydrates are monosaccharides, right? So any polysaccharide or disaccharide that we ingest has to be broken down to a monosaccharide in order for it to go from the digestive system into the blood, okay? In order for it to be absorbed into the blood. Proteins have to be broken down to their monomers, which are amino acids. Very good. So you all remember. So if you eat a steak, high in protein, or a hamburger, beef patty, though the proteins are too large to be absorbed from the digestive system to the bloodstream, so they have to be broken down to their monomers, again, which you all said are amino acids. Fats have to be broken down to their monomers, which are glycerol and fatty acids. These you all, I'm going to go over this next week on Tuesday. But so what happens is, as we said, all of the monomers are absorbed into the bloodstream. Sometimes the fats are not able to absorb directly into the bloodstream through the capillaries, so they use the lymphatic system. There are structures called lacteals that will absorb the fat in the digestive tract and then transport it to the blood itself. Okay, so when you look at this picture, obviously you have the circulatory system. You see the reds and the blues and the greens. So the reds obviously are what? So when you see red, that means, for the most part, arteries, but not really. Oxygen rich, right? So in those red vessels, the blood is oxygen rich. Most of the time, that's going to be in arteries if it's the systemic circuit. The blue represents CO2 rich blood. Good. And the green are the lymphatic vessels. Okay? The lymphatic vessels do not contain blood or blood cells, for that matter. The lymphatic vessels, also unlike the circulatory system, have one open end and one closed end. Remember, the circulatory system is closed. So blood starts in one spot and it's going to end up back in that spot. The lymphatic system is not that way. There's an open end and all of the lymph fluid goes in one direction back to the circulatory system. Now, why is that necessary? So one of the things we talked about is when blood goes through the capillaries, what happens? So as blood goes through the capillaries, let's just say this is a capillary blood vessel. So as blood flows through here, and there are tissues surrounding. Remember, tissues are made up of what? Cells. Okay, so our body tissues, in order for all of these cells to be able to make ATP, they have to receive what? Oxygen from the blood. So when blood is going through the capillaries, oxygen diffuses into the tissue. Okay? And as blood gets ready to exit the capillary bed, CO2 diffuses from the tissue into the bloodstream. So that's where the exchange occurs between the capillaries of the circulatory system and the tissue. Okay, so that's, you all know that. Another thing that always happens is some of the fluid from blood leaks out. Okay, some of the plasma that is in the circulatory system leaks out into the tissues as well. Okay. Fluid leaks into the tissue, and that fluid in the tissue is called interstitial fluid. So that is tissue fluid. Okay? Now, what the lymphatic capillaries, so the lymphatic system has vessels and capillaries as well. The lymphatic capillaries are responsible for absorbing some of the fluid from some of the interstitial fluid. So what actually becomes lymph is interstitial fluid. Okay, so it's kind of a sample of the fluid in your tissues is picked up by the lymphatic capillaries, and that fluid is going to be returned to the circulatory system. So, in other words, if there was no lymphatic system, we would run out of blood. Okay, because all of the fluid would leak into the tissues, and none of it would go back. So the primary purpose of the lymphatic system is to pick up that excess fluid from the interstitial space and return that fluid back to the circulatory system. So all of the lymphatic vessels end up sending that fluid back to the circulatory system by dumping it into the subclavian veins. So you have a right subclavian and left subclavian, and the fluid enters the circulatory system there. Okay, so hopefully you understand now how the lymphatic system is responsible for what? Fluid balance. Okay, it picks up fluid from where? Interstitial tissue, and carries that fluid where? To the subclavian vein, so it goes back into the bloodstream.
So this composition is still the same. I mean, it's still plasma.
Yeah.
Composition as it goes to the tissues, to the vein.
No.
Doesn't change.
Right. So as blood goes through the capillaries, just a small, not everything that's in the fluid comes out, in the plasma comes out, like proteins, large molecules, not everything comes out, just a few. One other thing about this is, as the fluid goes through the lymphatic vessels, those vessels go through lymph nodes. So the lymph nodes are found in different areas of the body. And as you all told me about lymph nodes, they contain cells that can detect foreign particles and destroy those foreign particles, okay, or have an immune response against those. And if, for example, so a lot of this, if you think of an example, it may help out. So if you step on a piece of glass, for example, you know that bacteria is everywhere. So if you step on a piece of glass outside, more likely than not, there's bacteria on that piece of glass. So as soon as your skin is punctured, what are those bacteria doing? Going into your body. Okay? So bacteria love the inside of living things because it's warm, moist. So it's the ideal place for bacteria to live. So, but that's in your foot. So how does your body respond to that? So if your skin is open and a bit of your tissue has bacteria in it, remember, these lymph vessels are picking up fluid from all of the what? All of the tissues, tissue fluid. So the bacteria is picked up and it comes through the lymph nodes. Now there are some types of cells right there in the lymph nodes that are trying hard to destroy the bacteria. But not all of the bacteria was picked up from that, right? Not everything in the interstitial fluid is picked up. Okay, just a sample of the fluid, a small sample of the fluid is picked up. But what happens is the bacteria goes through the lymph nodes, but there are lymphocytes there which will make antibodies against the bacteria or whatever foreign invader is there. And those antibodies go back to the bloodstream, and then as blood circulates to your foot, those antibodies and whatever other cells that fight off infection are going to be sent to that area. So really the immune system is amazing. You all should, when you get a chance, just go ahead and read the entire chapter. It really is. So you have these the cells there that can detect foreign material, and what happens when your lymph nodes are swollen? You have your immune cells, immune system cells, fighting and battling with the bacteria. Okay, it's like a tug of war. Whoever wins, if the bacteria wins, you're in trouble, right? So if your immune system wins, you'll be okay. And sometimes it takes help with medication because you may have the bacteria outnumbering the number of immune system cells. Okay, so that's kind of the gist of what's going on here in a nutshell. So that's the infection part. So what were the functions again? Fluid balance, so y'all have that, protection, and then absorption of fats. Okay. And now just some little details, not as important as the rest. The lymphatic capillaries are made up of endothelium, just like the circulatory system vessels. And they're more permeable, though, than the blood capillaries. And they have valves to prevent the lymph fluid from going backwards. They're closed at one end. And then the lacteals, as we said, absorb digested fats. Lymphatic vessels, this just goes through the types of vessels, the location of the vessels, and the location of nodes. And then the ducts, I do need for you all to know about the right lymphatic duct and the left lymphatic duct, which is called the thoracic duct. Those should be thought of as collecting ducts. So all of the lymphatic vessels dump their lymph first into the right and left lymphatic duct, and then from those two ducts into the subclavian veins. Okay? So make sure you understand this picture. There will be, I'm sure, a question or two on the test. So make sure you understand what the different parts of the body, where they dump their lymph. So you can see that the color of this picture, you can see it's blue in the upper left-hand part of the picture. But that is her what? Her right arm, her right upper body. So what that means is that all of the lymph that comes from her right upper limb and her thorax, right upper thorax, is going to dump into the right lymphatic duct. Whereas the rest of the body, including both legs, the fluid from both legs will dump into the thoracic duct. And then from the thoracic duct and right lymphatic duct, all of the fluid is delivered then to the subclavian vein, the right and left subclavian vein, respectively. Okay, y'all get that? So on the test I might say fluid from the right hand is delivered to what duct? To which duct? The right lymphatic duct. Okay? Fluid from your right foot is dumped into which duct? The thoracic duct. Good. Okay. I usually have a couple of questions like that. All right, movement of lymph. So unlike the circulatory system, there is no pump like the heart. So how does fluid move through the lymphatic vessels? There are valves, as we said, that contract rhythmically, and that causes a slight pumping action. And then skeletal muscles compress the vessels and push the fluid forward. Lymphoid tissues are distributed throughout the body, and they make up specialized organs of the lymphatic system. Lymph nodes, and you'll see different books will have different groupings. You've seen these words before: inguinal, mesenteric, axillary, and cervical. So if you know where those areas are, you know where they are. The lymph nodes are. So cervical is where the neck region. So there's a cluster then of lymph nodes in the cervical area, in the neck area. Axillary, good, underarm. Mesenteric, right, the digestive tract, digestive organs. And then inguinal, right, the groin area. Okay, so there's a cluster of the lymph nodes in those areas. And this is a lymph node, what a lymph node looks like. So you can see the afferent vessels, lymphatic vessels. Afferent meaning going toward, right? So going into the lymph node, and then efferent means leaving. Okay? So fluid goes in that way. You have the germinal center, which is where you have the developing lymphocytes, and you also are going to have macrophages in there that can attack any foreign material that comes through. Okay, the spleen is sometimes called a large lymph node. It does have some of the same effects, but it has other functions as well. One of the functions I think we talked about before, is it cleanses blood. So just as the lymph nodes filter lymph fluid, the spleen filters blood in that same way. The spleen also has lymphocytes, which makes it similar to the lymph nodes in some ways. One of the primary functions, though, that we talked about before, remember that old red blood cells, when they are no longer functioning, are going to be sent to the spleen where they're destroyed and broken down. So for that reason, the spleen is called a graveyard for red blood cells, and also it's referred to as a reservoir for blood. The thymus, where's the thymus? Okay. So the thymus is one of the glands, and it plays a key role in early immune system development. And that's very early in our youth. In fact, the older we get, the smaller and smaller it gets. It shrivels up to almost nothing. And it produces thymosin, which is important for development of T lymphocytes, and it promotes lymphocyte growth and promotes lymphoid tissue activity. The tonsils are also lymphoid tissues, and they remove contaminants and trap pathogens. So so you have the palatine tonsils, the pharyngeal and lingual tonsils, and they're kind of in a circular shape behind the throat, in the back of the throat. Why do you think that would be a good place to have lymphoid tissues that fight infection? Exactly. So that's an area where things normally come into the body. So anything coming into the body is likely to have some bacteria or some other pathogen. And so that's kind of a gateway to stop whatever dangerous is trying to get in. Okay? And the pharyngeal tonsils are called adenoids. And those are some other lymphoid tissues, and the reticuloendothelial. I won't worry too much about that. And you'll hear about monocytes. Monocytes, again, are another type of white blood cell, and they actually give rise to macrophages. So macrophages circulate and they end up in body tissues to get rid of any debris. So cells responsible for destroying worn out blood cells, bacteria, cancer cells. That's one that students are usually surprised about, that our immune system destroys cancer cells as well. So some of us may develop cancer and never even know it because our immune system takes care of it before it wreaks havoc. And other harmful substances. So in some parts of the body, just so you don't take this stuff for granted, think of what the lungs do. We're going to talk about the lungs and the respiratory system on Thursday. But what is really the one and only function of the lungs? Right, gas exchange. Bring oxygen in, right, to the blood and release CO2. That's it. That's all the lungs have to do. But think about how difficult that would be. So when oxygen is in the lungs, it has to diffuse from the lungs into the blood capillaries. So there must be a small space then for that to happen. Just imagine if the lungs filled up with dust, right? We're around dust all the time. We don't see it, but it's getting in there. Okay? So we have these dust cells, which are a type of macrophage in the lungs. And what they do is eat those little pieces of debris, okay, dust. And again, that's important. We wouldn't live very long if the dust that got in was not able to get out in any way. So a thing I like about macrophages is they don't just eat other living things like bacteria. They also eat some of the non-living things as long as they're made up of organic matter. Any of you ever had a splinter that you couldn't get out? And usually people just keep on until they get it out or go to the doctor and get it out. But if you never get it out, eventually it disappears. Anybody recognize that before? So if you have a small splinter, after a few weeks you'll notice it just disappears. And what's happening is macrophages are eating it. Okay, so the macrophages detect that it shouldn't be there. And splinter comes from living matter, so it's organic. What about, you ever had surgery and didn't have to have, you had to have stitches, but they are called what? Right, the ones that supposedly dissolve, so you don't have to come have them removed. Well, they're not dissolved. The macrophages are eating them. Okay, so the macrophages detect that they don't belong there, and they get rid of them. So I love macrophages. Okay. Some of the disorders of the lymphatic system. So you'll just kind of know these terms when you see them. Lymphangitis, inflammation of the lymphatic vessels. Septicemia, blood poisoning. So that's invasion of the bloodstream by virulent microorganisms such as bacteria, viruses, or fungi. And then lymphadenitis, inflammation of the lymph nodes. And what you'll see a lot of times is adenitis or adenoids are usually referring to lymph nodes. So lymph nodes are sometimes called adenoids. Okay. And then lymphedema. What is the second part of that word? Edema. Swelling. Right. So lymphedema, tissue swelling due to obstruction of lymph flow. Does that make sense to you? Tissue swelling due to obstruction of lymph flow, caused by infection of lymphatic vessels. So remember, the lymphatic vessels are carrying fluid to some place, right? Trying to get it back to the circulatory system. If the lymphatic vessels are blocked, that fluid has nowhere to go. So it stays in the tissues, and the tissue gets large. In fact, have any of you ever noticed a person who had a mastectomy had a breast removed. What else do they remove when they remove the breast? Axillary lymph nodes, so y'all know that. Have you seen anyone who's had that done up close, like somebody you live with, or anything look different after that surgery? No. So the arm gets big. So whichever side the breast was removed and the axillary lymph nodes were removed, that limb gets large, and that's because the fluid has nowhere to go. So remember, the fluid goes through those axillary nodes and then to the what? The subclavian vein, where there's no path, so the fluid just stays in the limb. Okay, so that's why that swelling occurs. Huh? Ever, forever. Well, what they do sometimes is just put compression on the arm, and then the fluid can't go back into the blood capillaries. So remember, we said fluid goes from the bloodstream into the tissue, so the tissues of the arm, and that fluid from the tissues of the arm is supposed to go to the subclavian vein. But if you put pressure on it, that'll force some of the fluid back in to the blood capillaries that way. So, but they need constant compression for that. Okay. One other thing about that I forgot to mention. So when you go for a breast exam for your annual checkup, they palpate your breast, but they also feel around where? Under your arm, right? So the thing is, whenever there's infection in a tissue, remember the bacteria that are in that tissue are cancer cells. So if you have breast cancer in your breast tissue, the fluid that is picked up by the lymphatic vessels is just taking samples of fluid from the tissue, and cancer cells are going to be picked up as well. And where is it that those cancer cells probably stop? Along the path in the lymph nodes. So whatever the closest lymph nodes are, the cancer cells will settle there. And your macrophages are there trying to stomp it out. So that's another point I wanted to mention. So usually if you have swollen cervical lymph nodes, that usually means there's an upper respiratory infection of some sort. Okay. Okay, and lymphadenopathy. The apathy part has to do with disease. So enlarged lymph nodes accompany certain diseases and infections such as AIDS and mononucleosis. Then lymphoma, the OMA means what? If you have OMA on the end of any word, tumor. So any tumor is in a lymph node or lymphoid tissue is called a lymphoma. And the two you should recognize by name are Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and just recognize those as cancers of lymphoid tissue. Okay, both of them are malignant. Okay. So they're characterized by enlarged lymph nodes, fever, night sweats, fatigue, and weight loss. The difference between the two, some people think, well, Hodgkin's is cancerous, non-Hodgkin's is not. They're both malignant. The main difference is in Hodgkin's lymphoma, there are a special type of cells present called Reed-Sternberg cells, but they are both malignant. Okay. That is it.